get started. We expect an overflow crowd because the median age of the journalists who we've invited is high enough that most of them don't know what scraping is. And so, which I didn't know anything about until I invited Christian Miller, to come to another session of the seminar on a Friday. And so I want to introduce T, who works now as a senior reporter. Is that correct? Senior reporter? He's much younger than me. I don't know why he's a senior reporter. But he's a senior reporter with ProPublica, actually based here in our offices in Berkeley, along with two of his colleagues. And T has made a specialty of trying to figure out how to apply various things which I don't understand to journalism and make it better. And so he's going to try to do we have these very short talks and actually get to the point on how scraping can help us all. T. Christian Miller.
Thank you. All right, so I only have 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and go through this pretty quickly. What I want to do today is talk about data-driven journalism, why it's important, and what you need to do it. So I'm aiming this talk at people who are kind of wanting to enter into doing data-driven journalism, as well as people who are managing or overseeing people who are doing it. So you have an understanding of what kind of things you can expect out of your reporters who are doing data-driven journalism. So what is it, first of all? It's basically any kind of reporting which relies in whole or in part upon data from a database, often publicly available, but you can self-build it as well, and often uses social science techniques to analyze and look at the rigor and quality of the information. Data-driven journalism does not make a story. You get a clue, a tip, a hint from the data, and then you've got to go out and report it. And data is just like any other source. It's fallible. It's full of holes. You can spin it in many different ways. So you've got to spend your time looking at the data you have and not thinking just because there's a bunch of numbers on a screen that you know the answer. So why is it important? It's everywhere. Compared to just 2 or 3 years ago, what would have taken a FOIA request and 2 or 3 months of negotiating like formats and sizes and things like that, it's all over the place. The transparency movement by government to put data out on the web is enormous. This is data.gov, which is one of the main portals. I don't know if you can see these or not, but you'll see that here's the US Army ethnicity breakdown for fiscal year 2010. A breaking news story about an Army shooting at a base. You could use that information. Here's US tomato statistics. I don't know why you want to use that, but I bet if you look at them, it might be something interesting there. Just kind of look and find out what's there. What can you do with it? So here's a couple of stories that I've done, both wonky and then more human interest. Citrus County Appraisals, a small county in Florida I used to work in. We looked at appraisal data and found out that the property appraiser in that county was giving much greater price breaks to wealthier properties than poor properties. And that was a consistent pattern throughout the county. Santa Monica Mountains, I looked at the growth plan and looked at growth densities using a mapping program to look at whether developers had approved oversized developments and where they had gotten their money from. And there was a strong correlation, obviously, between the developer and the granting of oversized homes on lots. On the right is Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a story about contractors who had been injured. The data underlay the story so that I knew there was a problem with contractors being injured. But I would say there might have been, in a 5,000-word story, maybe 100 words were devoted to the data I found. And the rest of it was just telling the story about what had happened and how the US had sent these contractors over to get slaughtered in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's some statistics about which companies were the worst to work for. But that was really a small part of the actual writing of the story, but it undergirded the whole story. So what do you need to do this? I'm going to divide this into 2 pieces. What does a reporter need to know? I think that every newsroom manager, every reporter should know how to use a spreadsheet. That's Excel, one of the Google Docs spreadsheets. You need to learn how to use a spreadsheet. I use them all the time in every story, whether it's keeping track of phone numbers or doing actual data analysis. A spreadsheet is just a basic sheet where you can do addition, subtraction, percent change. It's not hard to learn. They're very user-friendly. And I think that it should be a requirement at this age of data that everyone can use a spreadsheet. The next step up would be a database program like MySQL or Access. That's a more specialized tool. It would be more used by project reporters. It's also not extremely difficult to pick up. It uses a kind of a little small coding language called SQL, but it's not that difficult to pick up. And then I think the last kind of level for a reporter would maybe be expected to use would be a statistical software package like SPSS or SAS. So those are all really specific programming steps. Where you hit the cliff is web scraping. I think it is too much to ask for a newsroom manager or for a reporter to expect to be a coder. And a coder is somebody who writes code in a language to get information off of a website, to combine information, to create new information. Here's an example of a script in Ruby, which is a programming language. Not many reporters are going to be able to kind of read their way through this or get their way through this. It's more or less, they're called programming languages for a reason. They're like languages. If you don't do it full time, you might be able to order a beer, but you're never going to get into a conversation about economics, right? This is where I think the divide is. If you're going to go into wanting to do web scraping, you're going to want to, there's a number of languages, Perl, Python, Ruby. There are holy wars about which language is best and not best. They are constantly being updated and changed, and new tools are being brought in and developed. So it's really a full-time job to be a reporter coder. So I think that if you want to do this level of web scraping and information, you're going to have to hire somebody, and that person's job is going to have to be more or less full-time doing coding and can do some of the other stuff as well, obviously. But you shouldn't expect if somebody can do a spreadsheet to also be able to do code. So what does that code produce? This is a really simple little scrape of Wikipedia, a Wikipedia site of Nobel laureates. It would produce this, just a simple table, spreadsheet table of the year the guy won the Nobel, what category, and their names. So you would just apply this script, run it in a little program on your computer, and you get this. Not so interesting. This is dollars for docs, which is an incredible use of scraping by an incredibly talented team of programmers we have at ProPublica. What they did is they scraped pharmaceutical company websites, which had data in different formats in different places, put it all together, and allowed you to then clean that data using scripting, and then put the data on the web, again using scripting. And so you can now look up your doctor, your individual doctor's name, and find out what drug company gave money to your doctor in the previous year. So if you're wondering where you're getting so much Seroquel, maybe it's because he got hired by, got several $100 million from the company to do speaking engagement. That took 6 months of work. And we just updated that for this year, and that also took 6 months of work. And that was constant cleaning and refining of the data. So one thing you need to understand if you're going to go into this world, and if you're managing people in this world, is this is not like magically pressing a button and something happens. It is really, really hard work. And it's like combining interviewing a source with writing a book. And again, the language metaphor is really apt. So that's web scraping. I can answer other questions about that as you go on. But the basic idea with web scraping is you use coding to get some of the data that you can't otherwise get. And you can download stuff that people don't want you to download. Other new tools. Muse is a tool which is being developed right now at Stanford to analyze emails, big email sets. You say, hey, when am I ever going to get an email set? Sarah Palin, just 2 years ago, they dumped all of her emails. If you had Muse, you could do a sentiment analysis, which shows is she angry, happy, mad, sad, who's she talking to, what day, when, who are her sources, what year. Gives you an idea of who, if you could get Dick Cheney's emails before he was doing the Energy Commission at the beginning of the Bush presidency, wouldn't it be interesting to see what kind of things he was saying? It allows you to automatically download every attachment, so you can this is mine, it's my daughter, my wife. So you can look at all your attachments. And it creates a very basic social networking system so you can see who it is that you're talking to, how often, and when. So you get a big dump of emails, and you want to know who's the most important guy in this person's life, or girl. Boom. You download, you use Muse, and it'll show you he's talking to this person more than anybody else. Another tool that I'm sort of working on, along with CIR and George Podesky over at CIR, is called the FOIA machine. And the idea of the FOIA machine is that you can automate FOIA requests internationally and nationally. So Mexico was brought up earlier by Gary Marks. Mexico has one of the most forward FOIA laws in the world. It's all electronic. You send them a query, they'll send it back to you. In South Africa, if you send South Africa a FOIA request for a 1975 document, they have to actually make it digital and then send you the digital copy. So internationally, there's a huge movement of transparency, and the FOIA machine is an in-development machine which will allow you to kind of do cross-examine, let's say, the Mexican government and the US government on immigration data and find out if there's differences there. Time flow, this is a constant need. Every journalist knows that chronology is at the heart of the story. Time flow is also a beta tool being developed at the Reporters Lab at Duke. It is a way to keep track of multiple chronologies at once. So if you've got 10 characters in a story, you can see what they're doing all at once. Entity recognition is another really fascinating area right now. This is from a tool called Document Cloud, where entity recognition pulls out the names and places automatically from a document. So I can see here are the people that are named in the document. Here's when they're named in the document. Here's how often by the size of the charge. So again, it's a way of looking at a massive chunk of unstructured data, which is data like text, and finding out what's going on deadline or later. This is the frontier. Human-assisted reporting is a term used by Ben Welsh at the LA Times. So when I was at the LA Times as a cops reporter, I had 57 calls to make every morning to the substations. I don't know how many there are now, but I had to make 57 calls to all the sheriff substations and police officers, find out what happened last night. I was depending upon getting a sergeant who wanted to talk to me, had some news sense, and would tell me what had happened. What Ben has done at the LA Times is they get all their 911 calls uploaded from LAPD every day. They have an algorithm which scans those 911 calls for things like 911 calls that happened in a high crime area, or they show a pattern of murders in a specific area, and that signals the reporter, here's something you might want to look into. Maybe there's something you want to do. So you're not, the computer is helping you give tips, but you still got to go out and report them and find out the information. This might scare some people, but this is called human writing. There's a couple of companies out there like Narrative Sciences, which are now doing, if you feed them a basic little chunk of data, they will write stories as though they are written by people and they sound like people. So ProPublica, these are very basic stories, and I think it's great. The fewer like baseball games and city council meetings I have to cover about one individual bill, and the more I can talk about sort of corruption and looking behind the bigger picture, the better off I am. And so this is the thing that ProPublica did where we had 52,000 schools, I think it was, and we wanted to have a description of each school. So we just pumped in kind of basic data about the school, and it writes a not interesting but human-sounding description of the school. And that way, I can look at what are the patterns across these schools? What are the racial disparities across these schools? Again, I would love for there to be more of this kind of narrative sciences, human-assisted reporting. It makes me more efficient. It frees me from kind of being the worker on the line who's doing kind of a drudgery task, and lets me step back and look at the bigger picture and try and figure out what's going on. So that is data-driven journalism. I think I'm out of time, but if I have time for questions, I'm happy to take questions now. One or two questions, OK. That was very fast. I know, I'm sorry, I apologize. Sure.
When do we get to use FOIA machine and TimeFlow?
Everything's in beta. So FOIA machine was introduced at NICAR this year, and you can sign up when it will be fully functional. You can do it. TimeFlow you can use now. It's beta. It's kind of clunky and chunky, but you can use it right now. You can go to Reporters Lab and download that. And they're both really early tools, but they will, I think, be adopted.
Give me a quick run-through on how TimeFlow would actually work on my desk. I mean,
OK, so you download TimeFlow, and let's say you are tracking Bernie Madoff, right? And there's let's just say. And you have characters spread all over Florida and all over New York. And so you're typing in these characters' names and in a spreadsheet. OK, so you're typing in Bernie Madoff, and on this date this happened, and then this happened on this date to this person in Florida. You import that in a TimeFlow, and you'll get a series of lines representing the person. And then all of a sudden, you see these dots. And you see that Bernie took out money here, and somebody else took out money there, And what you couldn't maybe have seen immediately, it visualizes events in a timeline in a life that make you suddenly aware of maybe there's a connection between these two things happen. This happened here, and then 2 days later, you see on this other line, this happened.
That's global.
What's that?
It's global in scope.
What is global in scope? Time flow? Global, and it takes whatever data you put in. So you have to, at this state, well, you can actually import data into it. But yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question of global. You can put in any kind of time chronology data into it, and it will show you how things move. Yes? Oh, the FOIA machine. Oh, I'm sorry, the FOIA machine. Thank you. Yes, the FOIA machine, that's what's being built right now, is you have to build in every kind of country, what their FOIA laws are, what their addresses are, what their ministries are. But the hope is that this will be actually crowdsourced so that if you're a German reporter, you'll enter a lot of this data for us. And if you're an American reporter, you'll enter the data for you, so that you're using sort of the knowledge of the crowd of investigative journalists to create this global database of FOIA places where you can request and track information automatically. Any other questions?
Does that include state open records laws?
I think that's a long-term plan to do state laws. But right now, it's more focused on the national, federal level. But yeah, it could certainly be done at the state level as well in some places. One more question, Josh.
Can you go into web scraping a little bit more? Some more
Sure. So web scraping is most useful in cases where the government will say, we're going to put this data online, and we're not going to give you a database. Or you can scrape, for instance, PDF files, which is a very common way to put out information. You can, like the Defense Department comes out every day with a contracts list for that day. You could create a web scraper that would go through that contracts list, pull out the name of the company, the amount they won, where they're located, every piece of information, and convert that text description press release into a line of data that you could then have a real-time, real feed of government contracts. Now, you don't really need that anymore with data.gov, but that was an early use of it. And you can create that with press releases, let's say from a senator's office, and you wanted to track gun control. And so you could go back through all the press releases that are coming out of a senator's office, use a sentiment analysis, which analyzes kind of certain words, key terms, and see if they're changed their position before or after the Connecticut shootings, and did they speak about it in a different way. You can look at that and then look at every person in Congress and see, did the conversation shift or not? That's another way to use web scraping and the coding tools that are available. It's astonishing what you can do in terms of making guesses at things and guessing about information and modeling and all that.
And what you're scraping is their press releases that are on.
Right. You're scraping what they're saying, and you're looking for patterns that you might not see with your eye, but that's what a computer's great at, looking at tons and tons of information and finding that little pattern that you hadn't seen otherwise.
You're creating a database and the capacity to search it for information that isn't already organized that way.
Correct. You're creating a database that doesn't exist and making it so that you can organize it and look at it. Better said than I. Thank you.
Thank you.